How are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm well. So you got caught in the rain?
Yep, rain.
Okay. Where were you?
I was at a farmer's market for family shoes.
I see. Do you like farmers markets?
Yes,
Right.
I do.
So,
Definitely
w-
rain right now.
do you remember what we were talking about last time? What we were trying to figure out?
Not quite.
That's okay. I remember. So, do you remember trying to figure out how many noodles are in a bowl of noodles?
Oh, yep, I do.
The next problem I was going to have you solve, and I don't expect you to solve it because this is a really, really hard one, is how many hairs are on Logan's head? Remember that?
Yep, I remember that. I
So
was thinking like I was thinking definitely maybe under 100 or over 100.
either under 100 or over 100?
Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
before we actually work on an answer, with hard problems, before you even work on an answer, I always like to think, how on earth would we figure that out? So do you know what brainstorming is?
Yes,
So let's brainstorm. How could we figure out how many hairs are on Logan's head? Do you have any ideas how we could figure that out?
maybe we could like when he's asleep, maybe we could like look through a magnifying glass and then figure out how many hairs are on his head.
So so I see you, he's sleeping, you've got the magnifying glass, and are you kind of counting them one by one by one?
Maybe by tens or something. If I find 10, 10, 10, 10.
You know what? What's interesting about that, I think that's an interesting idea. What's interesting about that to me is that I think it would be really confusing. There are a lot of hairs on a head, so I think it'd be
Oh, yeah.
confusing to figure out. Do you know how to braid hair?
Braid hair?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Okay. I bet your mom or dad knows how to braid hair, don't they?
Yeah, my mom does.
So suppose that, and we're still brainstorming, but suppose you, every time you counted 10 hairs on his head, you braided those 10 hairs into a little braid. And then that way, you're not going to recount them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Of course, he would look pretty funny at the end because he'd have all these little tiny braids all over. But that's one way. We could count them by tens, and then to avoid recounting them by accident, we just braid every 10 hairs. Is there any other way we could do it?
Maybe we could get a microscope and then look under the microscope.
Okay, and I think with a microscope, we'd see like the roots of his hair. We'd even be closer than with a magnifying glass. So in
But
some
then
ways,
that we know, then we could be counting by, let's see, 20s.
okay, so we count by 20s now. I'm thinking if there are lots and lots of hairs on his head, and he has a lot of hair, doesn't he?
Yeah, pretty much.
I bet it could take a long time to count all the hairs on his head.
Yeah, it would. I'm looking at his head right now. He has a lot.
He has a lot. So with the noodles, I was trying to help you think about multiplication. Do you remember talking about multiplication?
Multiplication?
Yeah, that's times. In math and arithmetic, that's when you do 2 times 4 or 3 times 4.
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay, so how about let's just do some practice multiplication before we go back to the hair counting. So suppose we're counting by tens. Do you know what 1 times 10 is?
What times 10?
Yeah, 1 times 10.
1 times 10?
Yep. Should I help you?
Sure.
Okay, it's 10. 1 times 10 means we just have one set of 10. But then, can you figure out what 2 times 10 is?
2 times 10?
Means we have 2 sets of 10s.
20?
Bingo! Brilliant! Exactly right. That's exactly right. So you've got a set of 10 toes and you've got a set of 10 fingers, and altogether if you count fingers and toes together, you've got 20 toes. 2 times 10. So how about 3 times 10?
30.
Bingo. 4 times 10.
40.
5 times 10.
50.
6 times 10.
60.
10 times 10.
100.
Brilliant. You are spot on. So because you got that so fast, now what I'm going to suggest is, I don't know, maybe 10 hairs is too small, but suppose we start braiding 10 sets of hairs on Logan's head so we know about them. And suppose, I don't know, well, suppose we did just half of his head. And suppose we had 10, braided sets of 10 on his head, and then we count them, and boy, I bet there are going to be a lot. But maybe if we figured out how many hairs are on half of his head, could we assume that there are more or less the same number on the other half of his head?
More? Do you mean like if there's more or less on the other half?
Yeah, the same on the other half.
How would we, what would we, brainstorm on, what would we think?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to think if it's easier, if we just could count half by the tens, if we could count half of his head, do you think we could just say on the other half is more or less the same, so we don't have to count those all over again?
Maybe we could just, do a check, so we could, count the other side and see if it's equal.
Okay.
Then if it's equal, we could add those two numbers together.
Okay. And that would give us how many hairs on his head.
Yep.
Okay, that would work. That would work. I guess I'm trying to figure out, Logan, this could take so long, he may have to be sleeping for like 8 hours. And I bet you'd probably wake him up if you're starting to count the hairs on his head.
Yeah.
Does he sit still when he's awake at all?
Is he awake?
Or does he sit still when he's awake, or is he moving all over the place?
When he's asleep, is he moving all over the place?
Well, if I guess I'm concerned it could take so long to count all the hairs on his head, he would have to sleep a long time before you were done.
Oh, yeah.
So that's why I'm trying to think of faster ways to count it. So I think this is a good math problem, and it's a really good, do you remember the word estimation?
No.
That's okay. So with noodles, we're trying to estimate, which means kind of guess, but guess kind of scientifically, guess accurately. We're trying to kind of figure out about how many noodles were in a bowl of noodles. And with the hairs on Logan's head, we don't have to do this for real, but I thought it'd be good to try to figure out about how many hairs are on his head. And if you want, maybe you could do just an experiment and see how many it'd be interesting to know, are 10 hairs about this much of his head, or are 10 hairs kind of little tiny bit of his head? Do you have any idea?
Like how many hairs?
Yeah, is 10 hairs a tiny bit of his head, or is 10 hairs a big part of his head?
I think 10 hairs would be just like a tiny part. Because 10 hairs would actually be really small for me. Because hairs are from when I see them are really small.
No, I think you're right. Which means that if 10 hairs are small and we're counting by tens, it's going to take a long time.
Yes.
So okay, well let me figure this out, or let's think about it some more next time. If you want, you can just do an experiment and try to count 10 hairs. Maybe if Logan's head is too small or he moves too much, you could try your mom or dad.
Okay.
But let's keep figuring out how to estimate things, okay?
Okay.
All right. I'm going to take off and let you have a wonderful weekend, okay?
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.